Hello everyone and welcome back to Dawn of War 3, this time for a very interesting episode of basically what is going to be a big analysis chunk of video content all on this massive long-awaited balance patch that, let's face it, I think a lot of players were very much looking forward to for many different reasons. Certain meta strategies and build orders were just completely overbearing in the meta that was pre-patch. So in Space Marines, we were just seeing Assault Marines plus Scouts every game. With Eldar, we were seeing Dire Avengers plus Dragon Scorpions plus Webway Gates every game. And with Orks, there was a lot of silly nonsense using trucks, and in particular the Stormboy command doctrine. So yeah, let's see how things have been changed and just get an idea of what's happening. You've more or less got my initial impressions here, as I've literally just scanned through everything, just so I don't get surprised by anything too crazy. But yeah, everything in here I more or less agree with, so let's dive right in, shall we? The only thing that is new, as we more or less expected, was the leaderboards. And I don't know if leaderboards includes the ranked system, as I haven't yet played the new version of the game. But yeah, you know, we can hope, and if it isn't including the ranked system that they promised, then I have to imagine it will be some short time to come. So, the cooldown on all super abilities, every single race's super, even the ones with very obvious downsides, has been increased from 5 minutes to 7.5. So overall, a nerf to the kind of power of super abilities, as in the late game, it was sort of a little bit silly how often you would see just a very powerful ability completely dictate how a fight would go, particularly in team games when there would be multiple super abilities available at any one time. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good idea, as it kind of, having these super powerful, big, you know, potentially army wiping abilities available so often during a game sort of removes the focus on good units, kind of micro, macro in the background, kind of strategies moving around the map, and sort of gave you this easy fallback option of, hey, this fight isn't going so well, guess I better drop my nuke. So yeah, I mean, first off, some people were complaining about the super abilities. Most complaints were directed at the Eldritch Storm specifically, as there's much less of a obvious kind of play around factor with Eldritch Storm, other than the initial kind of clearly like obvious counterplay of just moving units out of the way, which is, you know, some will say quite hard to do because of the slow effect. But yeah, I think this is a pretty cool change. It'll make the game more interesting long term. Base requisition rate has increased from 260 per minute to 340. So faster games we can expect, as we will be gaining more resources, we will be fielding more units, and we'll feel safer to just kind of throw out more requisition based units. So particularly good for the Orks, as they do love to make lots of boys, shooter boys, and tank busters. So that's going to be pretty cool. Base turret damage reduced. This is a very interesting section here. Kind of shows what they are starting to think about their model of the game. So base turret damage has been reduced overall, and even in team games where the damage is kind of scaled according to each player, as you can see here. So in, let's see, in a 1v1, a base turret will do base damage of 25, in a 2v2, 37.5, and in a 3v3, 50 damage, which is what it's currently at. So in 1v1s, turrets will have much less of an impact than they currently do. And what does this mean for 1v1s? Well, aggression will be more rewarding, which is kinda cool, as aggression sort of gives games, particularly competitive games or games that are trying to be competitive, a bit of a razor-sharp edge by which you can really punish players who aren't, you know, winning fights as often as maybe they should. And if you're starting to worry that maybe the game's going to get too kind of slit throat, as it were, then we do have this kind of change here, which actually kind of compensates for the decreased effectiveness of turrets shown here and here. So in escalation phases in the early game, you will actually have even more of a refund on any unit that you lose. So it's going from 25% to 35%. So, and in phase 2, this is going from 15 to 25. which is a really significant increase. As in the mid-game, i.e. Phase 2, which if you don't know is 10 minutes onwards, until Phase 3, which I do believe is 20 minutes, but I might be wrong. But I'm pretty sure that is the case. But yeah, in Phase 2, which is sort of the mid-game going into the late game, your units will still be refunding quite a bit. So yeah, I think we can expect more sort of long-term big armies shown by players, which should be pretty cool. So yeah, these changes in particular, very interesting for how games are going to kind of progress from the early game into the mid game, and how quickly they end, particularly regarding the changes to turret damage overall, as now they're going to be much less scary. Tier 1 units will be much more effective against them than they currently are, and so yeah, maybe aggressive pushes will still, will now be possible, whereas they weren't before. And if you haven't guessed already, yes, this is going to be a very in-depth analysis, so grab a cup of tea, grab a slice of cake if you have one, or maybe just a couple of biggies, and we will continue with the analysis. So let's get straight up underway with Space Marines, the iconic race for Dawn of War, and I guess Warhammer 40,000 in general. So the Servitor, no real changes here, so we can skip that, just some bug fixes, very nice. The Tactical Marine Squad. So yeah, the Tactical Marine Squad was a unit that was completely outclassed by more or less every other unit at its cost level. And the Tactical Marines were basically just fairly basic infantry frontline soldiers who could have some kind of significant impact in the mid-game, as they could be upgraded with variable upgrades, flamers and plasma guns. But this was sort of played down because Assault Marines plus Scouts just completely made them pointless, Tactical Marines, and Dire Avengers plus Web Gates completely outshined them, as did kind of like Orc boys running in to charge them, because, you know, melee beats ranged every time. So what did they do? Well, first off, they have completely given them a statistical increase in damage. As you can see here, they've gone from, you know, 2.85 range damage to 4. Melee damage has also been increased because Tactical Marines should be better than other basic ranged units at melee because they're Space Marines, they're superhuman, etc, etc. Lots of lore reasons why that should be the case. And most importantly and most significantly, both of the upgrades available to the Tactical Squad have been drastically decreased in cost regarding reinforcement cost. So the upkeep, the kind of continual upkeep of reinforcing squads that have been upgraded, will be drastically reduced. It's gone from 7 power and 70, basically just 70 requisition for reinforcing a squad member into a flamer squad, to merely, you know, low 60s requisition and only 2 power. That is a lot cheaper than it currently is. And again, with the plasma gun upgrade, you can see it's gone from 9 power, which, let's face it, is the important resource in Dawn of War 3, all the way down to 3 power. So they are much reduced in overall cost. The initial cost of getting the upgrade, and of course the upgrade building, that is still there. But long term, if you have a whole bunch of squads of Tactical Marines upgraded with flamers or plasma guns, this is really going to help out those kinds of armies, which is pretty cool. Very cool indeed. So Tactical Marines have just been buffed across the board. Hooray, huzzah. Scout Snipers. And this is definitely one of those overlooked units that, let's face it, a lot of people have forgotten about. Very similar to, tries to pick a random unit out of his head, Fire Prisms, I guess. Not many people use Fire Prisms because maybe they've tried them and found out that they weren't that good. So Scout Snipers, how have they been buffed? Well, they have got just an overall increase in the rate of fire. Let's have a look. So they can actually move after firing without having to dismantle their weapon, which is sort of a key mechanic to very long range or very ranged focused squads, so such as heavy weapon squads, Dark Reapers, Devastators, Rangers, other sniper squads. All of those types of units, they have a setup and dismantle kind of process before they can A, fire, and B, move on after firing. But Scout Snipers are going to be much more maneuverable, as they will only need to set up before firing, and then they can just immediately scarper if danger happens to look their way. So this is pretty cool. And if we take a look at this, the increased rate of fire that I was just talking about mostly comes into play with a hidden speed boost after firing. Actually, never mind that, that's purely speed. But regardless, this makes them much harder to catch. If you happen to have a bunch of orc boys, you notice you're getting shot at from afar by scout snipers, good luck catching them, because chances are you will not be able to with this change. So that's actually pretty cool. In fact, this unit could be very good now? Question mark. So yeah, this is definitely going to be interesting to play with. One of those units, you know? Potentially it could be good. Who knows? So, now we've got to a juicy one. Assault Marines. Let's see what they've changed. Well, first off, they have, the thing that instantly springs to mind here when I look at this page, Power Sword upgrade is now available in Tier 2 instead of Tier 1. So one of the main problems with Assault Marines as of pre-patch, I guess at the moment, is that they can very quickly scale into all-purpose, just strong units, simply by upgrading them with Power Swords, as the Power Swords change their damage type from normal to true damage, which means that they're equally effective against vehicles, against buildings, against objectives on the map, turrets, shield generators, as well as already being great against standard infantry units, all those other juicy and quite squishy Tier 1 squads. So moving this upgrade all the way behind Tier 2 will mean that there's essentially a phase of the game where you can just be perfectly safe knowing that your opponent's Space Marine player will not have Power Swords, as it would have required them to get a very fast Tier 2 kind of tech upgrade, which is quite hard to do, really, unless they have overwhelming map control and therefore overwhelming resource control and power. But yeah, this is definitely really cool. It'll make them just worse initially, which is great. So, jump. The recharge generation time has been increased quite dramatically, 25 seconds. This is not insignificant by any means. This basically means you have to be more careful with how you use jumps, but it is worth mentioning that there are multiple charges of jump. So how much of a change this really is going to be, I'm not too sure. Let's face it, if Assault Marines have jumped into your resource generator farm and they're wailing away, they wipe all your generators and you send a squad to kill them, chances are by the time you do that, they will have regenerated another jump or will still have one of their previous jumps kind of charged up and ready to go. So I don't think this is a huge change. Nowhere near as big of a deal as this change is, moving Power Sword upgrade to Tier 2, but you know, it's still toning them down, which is still definitely appreciated, as I think everyone can attest to, given the current state of the game. And one last thing, actually two last things. First off, the Assault Leap Doctrine, which was available from the Venerable Dreadnought for Space Marines, the 7-cost elite, that doctrine has been it's been curb stomped, let's face it. It's gone from damage being 75 to 20. That is huge. That's really huge. I actually don't think that this doctrine is good anymore with this change. Like, we're looking at... No, I mean, that's not enough damage to warrant taking a doctrine slot. So, in some ways, I'm actually sad because this basically nukes from orbit one of the doctrines in the game for Space Marines. But, you know, maybe if you get enough Assault Marine squads, maybe you go for like a spam Assault Marine style, and you still have Assault Leap equipped as a doctrine, maybe then it's worth it. But if you're going for just standard Assault Marine usage, I don't think that Assault Leap is worth taking anymore. Sadly enough. Yeah, like I said, slightly disappointing. I would have rather that wasn't completely destroyed in viability, but, you know, that's fine. There are casualties in all wars, etc., etc. And the last change for Assault Marines. The upgrade cost, not only is it locked behind Tier 2, but the cost of this upgrade has just been... it's been increased by 50 requisition, 50 power, straight up, which is a lot, really, as it delays a drop-podded Dreadnought, it delays Tier 3 into tanks. Yeah, this is a big change. All of these changes combined, I think, is going to lead Assault Marines down a much more balanced road The only thing I don't agree with here is, like I said, the Assault Leap nerf. I think that's slightly heavy-handed for what it is. But we'll see, you know? We'll see. Yeah, very cool. Okay, Las Cannon Devastator Squad. This is actually another slightly overlooked squad, simply because its effectiveness and purpose in battle is rather anemic, sort of weak. And they say this here. They suffer too many disadvantages relative to their counterparts with none of the show-stopping power. Which is true. When you saw a Devastator Las Cannon squad shooting at your tank, you weren't instantly afraid. You were like, oh, I guess I better kill them. Fairly sharpish. But you weren't panicking. It wasn't like their counter met your unit and you realized that you were in big doo-doo. None of that at all. So if you didn't know, the way Las Cannon Devastators work is they actually charge up in damage over time. Very similar, in fact, to Shadow Spectres from the Eldar. And one change they have done, which is just a straight up buff, is they've made it so that when you switch targets, the beam intensity actually doesn't reset to stage 1 beam intensity, and there are 3 stages of it. So yeah, this is a straight up buff. It means that once they've charged up their damage to stage 3, they will be great against their ideal kind of armoured vehicular targets. So that's pretty cool. The beam intensity will also decay slower when out of combat. So once they're charged up, and if you're moving them from one place in the battlefield to another to start shooting again, they will be better at that, which again is just pretty cool, increasing their overall viability. And beam intensity will reset when stunned, knocked back, or otherwise crowd controlled, which makes sense because, you know, that should be a counter, like an option of counterplay from the opponent to your now, you know, drastically more powerful Las Cannon Devastator squad. You just got to throw some kind of crowd control ability in their direction to counteract their vehicular damage. So yeah, Las Cannon Devastators, straight up improved. Whirlwinds, no changes. I agree with this. They seem to be working as intended. Their grey area denial, if your opponent doesn't target your Whirlwind kind of backline, then they're going to get punished by it because they'll take kind of lots of attritional losses over time from multiple Whirlwind shots. So yeah, pretty cool. Cool unit. I'm glad it's in Dawn of War 3. Predator Destructor. So if you don't know, this Destructor variant of the Predator battle tank for the Space Marine faction, this is the anti-infantry variation compared to the Annihilator, the Predator Annihilator, which is much more focused on taking out big vehicular-based elites and just other big tanks in general. So this led to the Predator Destructor, this variant here, to be much more ignored compared to the Annihilator, as the Annihilator was just amazing against A, turrets, B, the power core, and C, any massive unit that the opposing player might have invested any amount of time or resources into, which kind of sucks. But on the other hand, this meant that the Predator Destructor was kind of overlooked in some regard. So they've basically just buffed it in effectiveness completely. They've given it an extra 500 health, which is cool, as the Destructor will need to be near to the fight to hit all those juicy infantry squads, and its area of effect splash damage from its main autocannon, that has been increased. So it's going to be doing overall more damage, not only because it will survive longer, but because its explosions, each individual shot, will hit more units. So yeah, Predator Destructor has just been buffed. Kill Team Iron Maw, they've just been buffed completely, which is fine, I guess, because the Kill Team wasn't seeing as much play as the Striking Scorpions and the Storm Boys, but they were in a pretty good spot. They definitely weren't unusable, and they were great against early kind of very aggressive strategies with their Vortex Grenade. So yeah, slight damage increases, 1 additional range damage, that's not a huge deal, and 2 additional melee, you know, perfectly fine. Don't have a problem with this. Jonah Orion. From what I quickly looked over before I loaded up this recording, this is a kind of continuous thing they're doing across the board for all the 3-cost kind of caster nuker elites. So Farseer, Maka, Weird Boy, and Jonah, they're all getting changed in very similar ways. So what they've done is for all of these units, they've basically given it a cap of how much damage it can do per squad that it hits. So it'll still be able to hit as many squads as, the AoE kind of hits, but Jonah's lightning and the similar abilities from the Weird Boy and Maka, within those squads, it will do drastically less damage in some respects. So if you take careful note here, it's gone from unlimited units per squad being hit, so by this it means models, I have to assume, to 5. So against Orks, that's a huge deal. Orks will be loving this change, which I guess is fine, because Orks were definitely the least powerful faction in pre-patch kind of state of Dawn of War 3. But against Space Marines, and to a lesser extent Eldar, this change will basically mean very little will have changed. But yeah, this is fine. It just kind of decreases the overall damage and blow-up capability of these kind of nuke abilities. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much weaker these 3-cost caster elites are compared to previous. But yeah, cool change. Hopefully it works out. Gabriel Angelos, apparently we're happy with where he was, and I think I was mostly happy where he was, but he did feel slightly too powerful, and apparently they agreed, so they have reduced the knockback on his critical strike, which in addition to doing bonus damage also basically forced him to do this kind of spin in the air and then slam into the ground where it would do AoE knockback around him. So instead of doing knockback, it now does, on his crit, just slightly more damage. So yeah, perfectly fine change. Didn't think he needed much changing, to be honest. Seemed fine. Terminators. So, what did they change with Terminators? So they added a knockback on the teleporter rival, which will mean that if they teleport accidentally into into an enemy squad, potentially they have an added opportunity to get a ability off, maybe start running, maybe start shooting before they get tied up in melee, as they say here. This is a purely ranged focused nuker kind of caster continuous damage elite at the 6-cost slot, so they're particularly bad when they get tied down in melee by something as simple as a Orc Boy squad, something really cheap and expendable like that. Even just a worker squad, tying up their ranged fire for a couple of seconds is more than worth sacrificing a worker. So the extra knockback seems cool. I don't think I have any complaints about that. This change I'm less certain about, as from what I've seen, the Terminator's Cyclone Missile Barrage is really powerful already. As in, if they have a full, loadout of missiles, as in they've charged up their missile launcher to be fully loaded, they can take out objectives alarmingly fast. And not just objectives, but buildings, forward bases, etc, etc. So I feel like this might be a bit too much of a buff. I didn't think they were in such a bad spot, but I guess we'll see. So Terminators, they've straight up been buffed. The Venerable Dreadnought. So he has, even though he's the source in some respects of the Assault Marine kind of meta that we just left, with his command doctrine Assault Leap, as we saw earlier, Assault Leap has been nerfed into the dirt. So Venerable Dreadnought himself, he's actually getting buffed, which is pretty cool, I guess. It's showing that Relic aren't being blinded by the current complaints and the current meta and the current balance, and they're very aware of which units are actually the problem units and which aspects and doctrines are causing the issues. So Venerable Dreadnought, he has just increased flat out 110 extra damage on his ranged fire, which is cool. Yeah, very cool. So, Imperial Knight Solaria. This is a really cool one. I'm really glad they did this because I wasn't sure that they were going to. But this, as you will see, and as you probably have already guessed, this is a very comprehensive balance update, which is really cool. Thank you, Relic, for doing this. Very much appreciated. So, Imperial Knight Solaria. What made her more or less unusable and unpickable at a competitive level is that comparatively to the Imperial Knight Paladin, she had a much shorter range, and therefore she had just drastically reduced usability, safety, and I guess utility overall. So if you wanted her to do damage, you had to much more commit her to a fight, in which case it was much more likely that she would get shot down by some source of anti-tank, or just get taunted by knobs, endlessly, whilst the Orc player kind of slowly whittled down her health. So yeah, she's basically just gotten buffs across the board, which is pretty sick, as she is definitely one of the cooler units in the game. So first things first, she no longer gets slowed once she's in her kind of overheated stage. Okay, so that's a big deal. And if you ever play the Solaria, you probably noticed just how slow she got. And she wasn't a fast unit when not slowed by Gets Hot before anyway, so removing the slow I think is a big deal. It'll definitely help her case in terms of choosing what elites you want to field, and the range of her main weapons, so her automatic fire, that has been given a very slight range increase, which yeah, again, that's just nice. It makes her safer to use, which for a 10 cost elite, that is a big deal. Very big deal indeed. So Gatling Barrage, the knockback effect, secondary effect, that has just been increased in effectiveness. That's fine, that's just a straight up buff again. And Iron Storm missiles, they have increased range. So again, yeah, overall increased range, increased utility, increased safety, and therefore increased viability as a very expensive elite to pick for Space Marines. Okay, so much of this last section for Space Marines is not too important. This is just kind of late game kind of balance for kind of big army comps. Since the pop cap in Dawn of War 3 is so large at 250, none of this really matters in most games that you're going to play, so yeah. But some of this is pretty interesting. So increased shields granted by Plant the Standard, so Plant the Standard being one of the faction mechanics available to every Space Marine player in multiplayer. The shield from that is basically just much better. It's been given an extra 150 shield. So what this means is that the doctrine that buffs the cooldown of the Plant the Standard ability, that's going to be even better. So look out for that doctrine. It's probably going to be an auto pick for Space Marines. Yeah, pretty cool. This one, not really a big deal. It's just affecting buildings that are currently under construction. How often have you ever dropped a drop pod on a building currently being built? Not often, I would wager. So yeah, that's fine. And Tip the Spear, this has been nerfed slightly, but overall, this isn't a huge nerf. I think what most people did with Tip the Spear was go out, win a fight with an aggressive kind of army, and then pull back before reinforcing. What this nerf changes, with its requirement that a unit be out of combat for 20 seconds before being able to reinforce, what it changes is that you can't just sit around a listing post, allowing it to shoot up any kind of attack heading your way, whilst also reinforcing your squads. Which is probably a good change, as that's a bit of a silly thing to do. So yeah, that is Space Marines. Moving on to Eldar. So, Bone Singers. Bone Singers have been nerfed. So at the start of the game, their warp ability, which is their teleport, that has been set on cooldown. So at the start of the game, Eldar will be moving at the same pace, capping the map at the same pace as every other race in the game, which, yeah, it just kind of sets the playing field much more level than it otherwise would be. In addition to this, the range on warp has been quite drastically hit. So it's gone from 100 to 70, which, as you can see, is quite a big deal. So yeah, Bone Singers might not be spammed as much at the start of the game, although it is worth mentioning that because workers in general, and this is why every race starts off a match at a high level of gameplay by making multiple worker units, every worker unit is just so cheap and so quick to make that I still believe that good builds will still make a bunch of workers just to be able to have the ability to spread wide on the map, gain quick map control, and also contest other worker units made by your opponent. So I don't think this will change how builds work. I think every match will start with multiple worker units, but even so, this change will probably make a lot of people in the community much happier. Okay, Dire Avengers. This is another one of those juicy units who I think everyone was expecting to see nerfed, and we're requesting that it got nerfed, similar to Assault Marines, similar to the Stormboy truck doctrine. So what have they changed? Well, basically they've just been hit with a statistically based nerf bat. Their overall range damage has been hit from 40, what it was before, to 30, which is pretty big, and their shields have gone from 20% to 10%. So is that the shields? This is the question. Is that the shields gained by the Dire Avenger doctrine or not? Too many strengths, blah 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 blah. You know what? It doesn't even say. So I'm not sure what aspect of their shields this nerf is going to impact, but as you can see here, these two changes together will definitely make Dire Avengers worse than they previously were. So yeah, more diversity from Eldar, definitely a good thing. Perhaps we'll see earlier warrior portals as a result. Who knows? Howling Banshees. So Howling Banshees I thought were actually in a fine spot. The only controversial thing about this particular unit was the Quick Strike upgrade, which as you can see here, has actually been significantly nerfed. I think Banshees are probably in a good spot. It won't change how people use them if they're using them as Relic wants them to be used, as in maybe you load up 2 squads of Howling Banshees into a Falcon and then drop them on top of some Devastator squads and they wreck face. That's still completely possible. But if you want to go for a, let's face it, fairly cheesy build of 10 Banshee squads plus Quick Strike upgrade and just insta-wipe squads using the Quick Strike, that is no longer going to be possible, as the damage from Quick Strike has been drastically nerfed, going from 65, more than half of its current damage, it's going down to 30, so 35 damage has been lost. That is huge, and the nerf to its, well, the buff to its cost, the upgrade cost of Quick Strike, definitely doesn't cover or compensate for the massive decrease in damage. So I don't think Quick Strike is any more worth getting, unless you are very committed to going for mass Banshees. But like I said, similar to Assault Leap, this is just so much worse that I just don't think it's worth spending the time or the build order kind of attempting to make it work. So Banshees, they're still very usable, but much less abusable, which I think is the underlying theme of this balance patch. Just reducing all of the potential abuses available in the game. Speaking of abuses, we have one of the main culprits of the closed and open betas abusable build orders, and this was Ranger spam. If you remember the betas, if you didn't play them, then I will give you a bit of a history lesson. What was a very common build and competitive build for Eldar was a elite slot used up by Ranger Ronin, and then mass Rangers very early on, coupled with just purely infantry damage upgrades, and you would just kind of attritionally remove models from whoever you were playing against, whatever race they were playing against, forcing them to reinforce, whereas you wouldn't be taking any losses, allowing you to tech up in the backline very easily indeed. So yeah, apparently some people were still doing this, as you can see here, cutting down on the dreaded Ranger spam. And what they've done to try and counteract this dreaded Ranger spam is increasing the power cost by 5, and also increasing the overall cost to unlock Rangers as a, I guess, buildable unit in the Warrior Portal, increasing that unlock cost with, first off, 25 requisition, which isn't really a big deal, but significantly 25 power. That is huge in the early game. That's sort of delaying your tier 2 and your bigger units by a big degree. These two changes, I think, will make Ranger spam completely unusable compared to more standard builds using other units from the Warrior Portal. It's just too much power to invest in a unit that is good, don't get me wrong, but not good enough for this additional power kind of investment. It delays your tech, it delays your tier 2. Yeah, not really worth doing. I think this, yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes. Rangers will definitely be usable, but more in the tier 2 stage of the game, I think. After you've got some tech kind of unlocked, after you've got some vehicles out on the map, and you want to convert your Dire Avenger squads into more usable and more useful Ranger squads. I think that's how they will be used from now on. I might be wrong, but yeah, it's a cool change. Cool change. So, Fire Prism. This was one bugbear that I had with the game since beta. It's that the Fire Prism, which was, as you can see here, the most power expensive, power hungry unit in the game, with a power cost of 375. That was more expensive than the Ork Big Track, more expensive than the Space Marine Predators, more expensive than anything. And it did not feel worth it. It did not feel worth the cost. And that is a terrible feeling for a unit to have. So what did they do to fix this? Well, first off, as you can see here, they have reduced the cost of power for the Fire Prism down to 325 from 375. On top of this, they have made some quite significant changes to how the shot from the Fire Prism works. So previously, it would hit with a initial damage value, essentially land on the ground, and after a short charge up, explode, doing knockback and additional damage. So the knockback has been removed, but has been replaced with just straight up more damage, going from 100 damage, as in the secondary explosion, to 150, and the damage type, which is the truly significant bit of this change, has been changed from normal, the explosion doing normal damage, to true damage. So this makes the Fire Prism amazing against everything, more or less. It's got more damage overall, and also I forgot to mention, the initial shot will be doing 320 damage. So overall, the Fire Prism is much more of a standard unit compared to what it was previously. Previously, it was a very strange tier 3 unit that was powerful, but in the weird sense that it was a continuous form of crowd control with its knockback. But now it's much more standard in how it performs. It does a lot of damage, and then it does even more damage after the secondary explosion triggers. So the Fire Prism straight up buffed across the board, and not insignificantly. So yeah, I think I'm happy with this, as the Fire Prism is a very cool unit. Heavy tank for Eldar, etc, etc. So, here we go. Getting to the really spicy stuff. Striking Scorpions. These were very annoying to play against, and very effective to play with, simply because they had true damage attached to their critical strike, on top of that critical strike doing double damage. So it had two bonuses, essentially. But now, they only have the double damage effect. As you can see here, the damage type on the crit has been changed from true to normal. So this is going to make a lot of people very happy, me included. Quite frankly, losing shield generators at 5 minutes in the game really doesn't feel great, particularly when it's due to one squad stealthing in and starting to wail away at it whilst you fight the main army of your opponent. So yeah, this change alone will make Striking Scorpions much worse, guaranteed. Hunt has been nerfed as well, but really the main thing here is this change. This alone makes Striking Scorpions much less frustrating and, yeah, much more balanced. So yeah, hooray! Everyone's happy about that. Okay, so moving on to Farseer Maka. So as I was mentioning earlier with Jonah Orion, and also referencing to Maka and the Weird Boy, a very common change to these types of caster, nuker, 3-cost elite units is that the max number of units hittable in a squad within the AoE of one of their units, of one of their explosions or abilities, has a cap now compared to it being unlimited. And as I mentioned earlier, this makes it much better for any Orc players out there, but much more or less the same against Space Marine and slightly worse against Eldar. So yeah, Farseer Maka overall nerfed. The damage from Psychoblast has been slightly tweaked, going from 150 to 125, in addition actually to the max number of units hit per squad going from unlimited to 4. So unlike Jonah, she has been hit much harder by this change. Damage mitigation as well has been actually increased. So the utility of damage mitigation has been improved. So she's slightly more supporty, as they do actually mention here. But the overall damage of her has been toned down. coupled with the overall changes to AoE kind of elite effects. So yeah, Farsimaka, overall, nerfed, but probably still good. As let's face it, the stasis ability, the AoE stasis, is hella powerful, in addition to her having a fairly easy to hit nuke. Jane Zar, not much has changed, just a lot of visual feedback and making it more obvious how she works. So if you didn't know how her Triscale Silent Death kind of throw thing works, is that the initial damage as it passes through a squad, or multiple squads because it does piercing, that's quite low relative to the later damage that it does passing back through that squad, if it does hit that squad on the return. So they've actually changed the damage values. This is more immediately obvious. You'll notice that the throw you do with her isn't doing much damage initially, but later on, when it passes back through them returning to Jane Zar, it will be much more effective. Warp Spiders have been buffed. Their slow mines will activate much quicker now, with a activation time of 7 seconds going down to 3. So this makes them much more useful, as they do mention here, during a fight, as it's much more likely that after those 3 seconds, after you plant those slow mines, those mines will have an opportunity to hit a target, as the activation time is just so drastically decreased, and therefore they are much easier to hit, and therefore are more reliable. So yeah, Warp Spiders, slight buff. Wraith Lord. So they've actually, from the sounds of it, nerfed the Presence doctrine from the Wraith Lord, which was called Wraith Recall, that allowed you to hit a button, and any Wraith units would be called to his position, which no one used because his Command doctrine was just so powerful in comparison. But apparently they thought the other option, the Presence, was also too powerful, so that has hit some brick wall nerfs, so to speak. Yeah, so Wraith Recall, the range has been reduced from global to 100, and you can only teleport up to 10 units, but let's face it, how many Wraith units are you actually going to have? So this is sort of much harder to be abused, which is sort of the name of the game of this patch, as I have mentioned, which is fine. So for all of those people out there who were complaining about Eldritch Storm, the super ability for Eldar, please stop complaining, as it has been nerfed quite heavily. The true damage, which, let's face it, wasn't big before, has been hit straight in the middle, straight down to half of what it was before. The lightning bolt delay has been actually decreased, but not many people were actually making the conduit for the Eldritch Storm, so basically this is just a straight up nerf to Eldritch Storm. Fantastic, great. Sucks to be Eldar. Webway Gate's health has been decreased from 700 to 600. So this, coupled with all of these changes down here, will break the current meta build for Eldar. So let's get into these changes. So in addition to them having 100 less health, they also, with the doctrine, the Command doctrine from the Wraith Lord, they can't relocate in Tier 1. Okay, so that makes... I mean, this change alone makes the current build of making a fast webway gate, coupled with multiple Dire Avenger squads into eventually getting a Warrior Portal, completely unusable, as you won't be able to teleport that webway around and follow your army as you move across the map aggressively. Not to mention Dire Avengers being straight up worse as well, statistically. So that's a huge deal. And then we get this one as well. Health regeneration can now only occur after 10 seconds of being out of combat. Previously, improved webways as a command doctrine would also give, in addition to the relocation in Tier 1 option, the increased health regen of the webway gate itself, kind of permanently. So these two are very big, in addition to the health decrease. And in addition to all of that, the relocation cast time has been increased dramatically, really, from 4 seconds, which is very fast, to 10 seconds, which is kind of average for other buildings. So yeah, Eldar are going to have to find a new build to follow, as this completely breaks their current way of playing at a high competitive level. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. I feel like this is slightly heavy-handed. It's fairly brutal, but let's face it, it wasn't fun to play against for the other races, and particularly for Orc players, as with all their melee units, they could be kited into infinity with a very well microed webway gate, relocating constantly around the map, giving fleet of foot to all the Eldar units. So yeah, the only way the current build will work is if you make a webway gate in a sort of just usable position that is sort of covering every angle that you expect to be attacked for. Alternatively, you make multiple fixed webway gates in Tier 1, and then in Tier 2 start relocating them to follow your army. Those are options, but yeah, these are very, very heavy nerfs, so yeah, let's see what Eldar does. Ooh, okay. We're nearly there. Last race. Stretch it out. Gretchen, Orks. So Gretchen, very little changes really. They've actually been buffed. So the doctrine that gave them Find the Goods, which allowed them to teleport to pieces of scrap on the battlefield, which was actually quite powerful for what it was. Now they place a mine on top of that scrap pile that you choose to teleport them to, in addition to stealthing after doing the teleport. So Gretchen are basically super spies now. They can move across the map really fast, and if you have this doctrine, they are the new and improved Bone Singer. Sure, why not? It's going to mean Orc scouting is going to be very powerful, and they will be able to get across the map kind of well with their workers, and kind of find those really big juicy scrap piles and make the most out of them, I guess. But that's only going to affect the mid-game, and only after there's been a couple of big fights. So yeah, it's not the biggest change, but it's still pretty cool. Honestly, I think this is too big of a buff, considering how heavily the Bone Singer itself was buffed as a worker unit. Admittedly, this is a doctrine that you have to equip, which kind of takes up the slot of another potentially good doctrine. So yeah, it requires some commitment, some cost to it, but yeah. It's a little too much, I think, for the humble Gretchen squad. Moving on to the boys. They've decreased the speed bonus overall that the Doctrine Get 'em Boys, which if you don't know, Get 'em Boys would essentially give steadily increasing buffs to movement speed up to, I think, 3 squads, depending on how many squads of boys were near each other. So if you had 3 boy squads, they would be running much faster than 1 boy squad by itself. It's sort of reinforcing the whole Orcs being a very mob kind of blobby race to play as, which is cool. But they've decreased those bonuses, and in addition to that, they've decreased the movement speed from Wa when it stacks with their shout movement speed, which is their microball ability. Orc boys are going to be worse. I mean, I don't think many people were using Get 'em Boys, but everyone at the high levels were using shout. Whenever they started a fight, basically, you would start shouting, get the shield from a level 3 shout, charging it all the way, channeling that shout to the end, getting that sweet shield, in addition to the attack speed and movement speed. And also, good players would be using Wa effectively. So yeah, boys are just going to be worse. Truck. So this was the only abused, I guess, unit, even though the fault lied in the command doctrine from the Stormboy elite's choice. So what people would do would make multiple trucks and multiple Gretchen squads, and then fill trucks with Gretchen squads, and then coupled with the essentially the kamikaze Stormboy ability given by the Stormboys themselves as a command doctrine, they would just throw Gretchens at objectives, doing really good damage. What was it? It was 350 damage to objectives and 350 damage overall. This allowed them to really quickly take out shield generators, very quickly wipe basic tier 1 infantry squads, and also gave trucks, for all intents and purposes, what amounted to a quite powerful missile launcher. which is silly, but yeah, that's what this doctrine gave them. So I completely agree with these changes. This was a silly build that A, looked dumb, and B, was just too good for what it was. So overall damage values have been reduced versus objectives drastically reduced. And yeah, this is similar to the Farseer Maka, Jonah Orion, and Weird Boy changes, where AoE is limited as to how many models in a squad it hits. So instead of being unlimited, this Suicide Bomber ability now can only hit 5 units within a squad, overall reducing its damage. The Deathcopter, again, this is another fairly overlooked unit. I didn't think they were that bad. It's more that in comparison to the Land Speeder for Space Marines, with their multi-melter upgrade and just like statistical values and health and damage, overall the Deathcopter was just so much worse that it felt awful to make one in comparison to making a Land Speeder. But yeah, this got a slight buff. I mean, not even that slight, really. It's been given 100 health. That's not bad. That's really not bad. Honestly, I feel like these could be good enough to make. They're really cheap. I think it's 100 rec and 100 power. So yeah, feel free to experiment with these poor guys, as not many people have. Should be fun. It's a fun unit. Very fun. Killer cans. These have been nerfed, although only in respect in regarding to a particular doctrine, the long-range rocket. So what this did was it gave your killer cans, every single one, not even upgraded with scrap, the ability to fire a very long-range, actually I think it might have been an infinite range rocket in a straight line. So obviously, in a game where the multiplayer objective is to take out key objectives that are fixed on the map, you had the potential to just mass a bunch of killer cans, shoot those long-range rockets from the doctrine across the map from a very long distance, and just snipe turrets without your opponent really being able to do anything other than sticking chump blockers in front of the turret to absorb the shots, which is pretty silly. So yeah, they've made it so that there is a distance kind of travel, which means that they can no longer just travel infinitely across the map, so you've got to be somewhat close to the objectives that you want to hit now, and the rockets expire after iteration. So yeah, this just tones down the ability to manageable levels, less abusable levels, which is great, and also they're just doing some kind of ease of life changes here. So yeah, Killer Can, overall slight nerf, but this was potentially abusable, which, as I have said so far, this is a kind of the current theme of this balance patch, removing all of the heavy abuse from the game and making everything sort of closer together in power level. So, the Death Dread. I did love this unit. This is one of my favourite units in the game and in 40k. It's just so cool, so orky. So, what have they changed? Well, really all that have changed is a doctrine relating to the Death Dread, which is the biggest scrap shield. So what would happen is that you would channel this ability and then gain a, just a massive health buffer. So the shield itself has been increased from 300 to 500, which is, I think, fair enough. That seems balanced considering, as they say here, how long it actually takes to get the shield activated. In addition, they have increased the duration of the shield. So if you want to charge a turret and just mob it down with a whole bunch of Death Dreads, and you have this doctrine equipped, the biggest scrap shield doctrine, you can potentially, sit outside the range, channel the ability now, and just charge in and take much less damage than you previously would have. Which is cool, because Death Dreads are expensive, very similar to Dreadnoughts, etc, etc, expensive walkers. They should be effective at what they should be effective at. Which was a terrible sentence. So, the big track. Very slight nerf in addition to a very slight buff. So, previously the secondary explosion from the big track would stun. Now it only slows, which I think is fine, as it currently does a lot of damage with its main shot. So yeah, the big track, this is fine. going from a stun to a slow. And let's have a look. Yeah, the power cost of the big track has been reduced by 25 power, so now it's in line with the updated Fire Prism, which is fine. It'll be interesting to see how much better the Fire Prism now is compared to previously, and how, well, I guess which unit of the big track compared to the Fire Prism is better now in a straight up fight, or in overall effectiveness, as they cost exactly the same, and they have very similar purposes. For all intents and purposes, they both are long-range artillery pieces, with quite high damage. So, yeah. Based on these changes, the big track is going to be the new CC long-range artillery kind of tier 3 unit, and the Fire Prism is just going to be all about the damage. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. And the salvage cost of making a big track from a pile of scrap, that is going to be very slightly cheaper, from 175 power to 165. Not a big change though. I don't think that'll affect anything. Okay, Storm Boys. As covered, the overall truck kind of, I guess, game plan of sticking Gretchens in trucks and throwing them out for massive damage, that has been nerfed. But other than that, Relic feel that they're in a pretty good spot, which I think I agree with. Other than their command doctrine, they were very fun to play with. You could play around them because they don't have stealth, or, you know, large amounts of true damage, which now striking Scorpions don't have. So yeah, it's a great unit. It serves its purpose. It's great in the early game, less good in the late game. You know, pretty decent stuff. Weird Boy Zapnoggin. Okay, so Weird Boy Zapnoggin was basically all that was holding Orks together, coupled with the truck strategy pre-patch. So he was super powerful because he had a lot of damage tied to multiple abilities. So it was almost never the case that Zapnoggin would have nothing that he could do to help a fight in your favour. He had 3 individual abilities, each of which did damage and also did something else. So yeah, he's basically been toned down completely in every regard and buffed slightly. So first off, apparently his auto attack did area of effect damage. I did not know that. But they have removed that from his ranged attack and instead, to compensate, changed his damage type from normal to true. So he'll be better against vehicles, which is pretty cool. Not a huge change, pretty insignificant overall, but yeah, seems fine. Scrap Blast was, yeah, a very good ability, and they have, similar to many other elites that we have already covered, Farseer Maka, the Stormboy Doctrine itself actually with its AoE, Jonah Orion, etc, etc, they've introduced this units hit per squad cap from unlimited to 5. So this will be much worse against other Orc players, basically. And the shield aspect of it has been slightly buffed. Only slightly. Overall, you have to understand that Zapnoggin was very powerful, so overall he's going to be nerfed, with slight buffs such as the true damage, such as the shield upgrade, to make it feel less bad. So here we go, used to do a lot of damage over time as it channeled the teleport, but now it does no damage, which is perfectly fine, as he already had a ton of utility. You know, 2 sources of damage, coupled with, here we go, pre-patch, coupled with the utility of his shield, coupled with the stun of Fist of Gork. So yeah, this is perfectly fine. Very happy that they did this. So here we go, the teleport no longer does damage, and Fist of Gork has been changed in the respect that it no longer does different travel time based on how far it's travelling. So before, if you did a very close range, basically point blank Fist of Gork, it would kind of go up in the air and then instantly hit, for all intents and purposes. It would be like a 1 second travel time. But if you try to throw it a long range, like a long way away to hit, say, a Devastator squad that was pew-pewing out all your greenskins, it would take longer to travel, and therefore there'd be some counterplay for the opponent to move out of the way of its AoE damage that they could quite clearly see was heading their way. So they've changed this in the way that they've kind of made everything easy to react to. So they've made it a fixed travel time. So even if you have Weird Boy Zapnoggin straight up next to the thing that he wants to Fist of Gork, it will take 3.5 seconds to land that Fist of Gork. So yeah, as I said earlier, he is getting nerfed. Make no mistake, and this is easily the biggest one. But all of these changes together means he's going to be much less auto-pick as an elite, and hopefully as a sort of secondary result of this, a secondary thing, we can see kind of more Commando Nob play, which is a really fun unit. Hopefully I'll make some multiplayer gameplays of that at some point, because it's so fun to play with. And also, God, I forget his name. The Big Mech. Big Mech, what's his face? Who is also very fun, particularly when coupled with the Commando Nob. So yeah, Weird Boy Zapnoggin was too good, and was only fine before because Orks were in a bad spot compared to the other races, and their overpowered builds. So yeah, now that everything else has been toned down, he himself has also been toned down. So, Mad Dread. This was one of those elites that very few people used. So, he has just been buffed. Straight up buffed. He's been given a flat increase in health, an extra 500 health just slapped straight on. So, yeah, he's pretty good. More tanky than he was. And to be fair, he's still quite squishy, considering that Gorguts, a 4 elite point cost elite, has 5,000 health. Mad Dread still has less health than he does. Although, of course, he does have the regen effect of walking over scrap, as well as his rampage ability. So, yeah, this is still understandable, but the health increase is still pretty cool. Hopefully more people will use him. And his tunnel ability has reduced cooldown by 15 seconds, which is quite a lot. So yeah, straight up buffed. Feel free to try him out. Gorkanauts, the Daka-focused Orc elite. Reddick felt that he didn't do enough damage with everything that wasn't his Rocket Fist, which was godly as an ability. So yeah, slightly increased ranged damage over time with his main kind of auto-attack weapon, slight increase from 15 to 20, and Older Daka now does not 80 but 100. So yeah, I think that's fine. Not many people were using him compared to Beauty the Morkanaut, because Beauty has her excellent shield and many sources of true damage. And additional changes, just some slight fixes, and once again all these quite peculiar population cap changes. Yeah, sure, whatever. And everything else is sort of less interesting. A lot of campaign stuff, a lot of functionality, just fixes. What have they changed in the UI? Nothing much. No mention of the replay system. Nope, no changes to the replay system, which sucks, but I'm guessing they'll do that in a later patch. So yeah, that has basically been my analysis of all of the changes that they have made. Themes to take away from this: previously effective builds, the previously top meta builds, Assault Marines plus Scouts for Space Marines, Webway Gates plus Dire Avenger spam for Eldar, and Trucks plus the Stormboy Doctrine for Orks. Those, I guarantee you, will not be half as effective as they were before. So please try something else. Please try something else. In addition to that, all of those 3-cost caster elites between the races, Farseer Maka, Jonah, Orion, and the Weird Boy, of course, they have all been nerfed. The fact that their AoE nukes do less damage against bigger kind of model-sized squads, so specifically much worse against Orks. Yeah, that is a thing. So definitely be aware of that. And maybe try Orks as a result, because come to think of it, that's definitely going to help Orc early game. Other than that, yeah, I think the game's going to be in a much better spot. I don't think there's any changes here that I drastically hate. Going back to the turret changes, be aware that you can now play more aggressively than you otherwise could. So yeah, that should be interesting. Let's see just how aggressive you actually can be in the early phases of the game, say phase 1 or early phase 2. Other than that, yeah, more Dawn of War 3 coverage definitely coming up, as this is a hell of a balance kind of overall game improvement patch. Pretty good stuff. So thank you for watching, as always. If you want more Dawn of War 3 content, more gameplay will be coming up fairly soon on my channel, so feel free to subscribe if you are not currently subscribed, and like if you liked this breakdown, and I will see you, hopefully, in the next one. Ta-ta.